Welcome to another session of LeadUP online virtual chats. My name is Samantha Castle and I'm the Senior Manager for Alumni Relations at the University of Pretoria. For those of you joining us today, LeadUP Online is a series of informative virtual panel discussions amongst well-renowned UP academic staff and alumni situated in South Africa and other parts of the world. Each session, we look to address topical issues of public interest that are affecting our society today. We would love to engage with you over social media, so I encourage those of you watching to comment throughout the virtual discussion and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Before I hand over to our moderator for today, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your ongoing support. So without any hesitation, let us begin with today's session.
So good day everyone, and welcome to the LeadUP Alumni Thought Leadership Virtual Chat. This event's tagline is "The Role of the Church in Community Support During a Public Health Crisis." In today's session, you will gain insight into the impact of pandemics on vulnerable communities and on churches, and also on societal inequalities and how they can be addressed. The importance of private sector participation, and how the role and impact of tertiary institutions, particularly that of UP, can be maximized. Of course, this event is brought to you by the University of Pretoria, and many other panelists who will be joining us are themselves UP alumni. Unfortunately, the VC is in France, where he received an honorary doctorate from the University of Montpellier, and unfortunately will not be able to join us this evening. We'd like to extend our heartfelt congratulations to him. So without any further ado, I would like to present our panelists for today. And let us start with Professor Jannie Hugo, who was the former head of UP's Department of Family Medicine, and is currently a lead academic for community-orientated care, the COPC. Next, we have Professor Stefan de Beer, who is the current director of the Center for Faith and Community and a lecturer at the Faculty of Theology and Religion at the University of Pretoria. And next, we have Dr. Genevieve James, who is the Deputy Director of Community Engagement and Outreach at the University of South Africa. And last but not least, we have Reverend Thabiso Mashulwane, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Hospivision. So let us start with Prof. de Beer. And a little context just for the listeners. When hard lockdown was announced and everybody was sent home, this is March 2020, I got a call from Prof. de Beer, and he phoned me frantically to try and speak to me about some of the negative consequences of the lockdown. And maybe, Prof. de Beer, if you could just share with our listeners what you saw as the negative implication of what the lockdown had on our communities.
Thank you, Lance. I think the call that you respond to, or that you mentioned, was specifically in terms of some of our most vulnerable communities, and particularly people who find themselves homeless. So I think there were four things that prompted that call. Maybe I should just locate myself. I consider myself to be an urban theologian. So the questions I ask are how does our theology that we do contribute to a good city, a just city, an inclusive city? And it's biased because I am particularly interested to ask questions about how the most vulnerable and excluded in our city, how do we make space for them? And so a lot of our own research in our center focuses on homelessness and housing. And so I was kind of shocked that I thought for a moment that I was actually looking forward to hard lockdown, thinking I'll catch up on life. And it was a strange thought afterwards because it was just not realistic. The second thing that prompted the call was the president's announcement of the hard lockdown. And there was one line in his announcement where he said, where he challenged municipalities and said all municipalities should create shelter for homeless people for the duration of the lockdown. His advisors might not have mentioned to him that there is no national policy, and only 2 provinces have kind of policies to deal with homelessness. So that announcement of him created or surfaced the fault lines in our society, and municipalities frantically had to figure out how to deal with what he required. Thirdly, then, the realization that people like you and me have the money and the resources to isolate when we're ill, to manage distance, to reduce risk, whilst homeless and other vulnerable people don't have that opportunity. And then the last thing was that the city was not ready for the crisis themselves. They created a space at the old Caledonian Stadium where 2,000 people pitched over 2 days. They were only ready with 100 mattresses and 100 plates of food, and that was soon going to be a big crisis. There was also about 500 people at the same time having withdrawals from not being able to access their substances. And so some of us on this call are part of the Tshwane Homelessness Forum that challenged the city. A homeless task team was formed, and that is where the whole journey started, and other people can also reflect it on that. But I think those 4 moments kind of triggered a certain response where we looked at each other and asked, what should we do at this time of crisis? And I think it also became an amazing opportunity to learn how to collaborate with each other in new ways.
Prof. De Beer, you speak about collaboration, and I think the next question then goes to Prof. Higo. When we think of the current context of the anti-vaxxers, and there seems to be a disconnect, or seemingly disconnect between church and family medicine. So maybe the question to you, Prof. Higo, is why did you think it was a good idea to work with the Center for Faith and Community, which is housed in the Faculty of Theology and Religion? And maybe also elaborate a little bit on your own commitment to vulnerable communities, and especially the homeless, and the collaborative response that Stefan just mentioned.
Yeah, it feels like a lifetime ago when we had the first lockdown, and we have actually changed quite a lot in our own understanding of what's going on. The way I think about it now is that that COVID made it so abundantly clear to us that the state is not able to do all the work in society. And actually, there are many other layers of society of which the church is one, which is quite widespread, and so the church can be seen as a definite player in making society, or the world for that matter, a place where we can live. And what has changed in my thinking is that we were under the impression that the state would take lead and the rest of society would support that. And that then includes the university as an institution. But your question on why we collaborated is that we were in the same space and we were facing the same problems and the same people that were queuing while they were having withdrawal symptoms, etc. So I think it just accentuated the need for several layers of societal structures and processes to all be playing a part in solving that. I think the Swiss cheese metaphor may come into that, and that we will definitely in future look more and more at the church as a vehicle for collaborating and sometimes even facilitating collaboration in terms of addressing that. I mean, there are many other issues around that, but I think the church's place and structure and its ability to act. I had just this afternoon a very exciting meeting with a whole synod of the Methodist Church, where we were planning the church to take a very active role in reaching difficult to reach people with the vaccination program, etc. And again, it is there, the university as institution and the church as institution that collaborate to do work in society, and then the state is another partner in that, and not necessarily or even at least the leader, but that a lot of that initiative comes out of the university and the church. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Higo. Dr. James, I'd like to move to you a little bit. As somebody from UNISA, and obviously not part of the UP system, how did you get involved in our COVID response? And maybe just comment on the importance of not just an inter-faculty response, but also an inter-university response during the pandemic.
Thank you, Lance. It's really a joy to join you all at the University of Pretoria. My name is Genevieve James, and I'm from the University of South Africa. We are sister institutions in the capital city. We're up on the hill, so we have our eyes on you. But coming back to what happened during the hard lockdown last March, like you, Lance, I received a call from Professor Stefan de Beer from the Center for Faith and Action at the University of Pretoria, and he alerted me to the impending crisis if we did not rally together and act together and mount a collaborated advocacy campaign, and not just an advocacy campaign, but a full-on action war room where we could look at, within the next 24 hours, a hard lockdown happening. How are we going to provide shelter, health screening, medical care, social work support, to the city's homeless across all the regions. So like you and Stefan, I also thought this was going to be a hard lockdown where I get to focus on writing and retreat into the isolation and insulation of academic life. And it was not meant to be. The next thing, we found ourselves with essential worker permits, and we were working in a war room style formation. And what was beautiful about this was that we, as the University of Pretoria and the University of South Africa, we didn't exist as rivals in that moment. We didn't exist as rival higher education institutions in the same city. We overcame institutional narcissism, and we became more alive to each other's passions and insights, and the knowledge that was being created and the networks that we had. And so we learned to listen together. We learned to listen to the heartbeat of the city, the heartbeat of those that whose voices were certainly not being heard, and whose voices were certainly not being prioritized in preparation for the hard lockdown. We also had to see together. We had to commit to asking, what is the Spirit saying to us as the higher education institution, and all the networks that we joined. And then we banded together to share our insights, our resources, our combined networks. And why did we as UNISA join the University of Pretoria? Lance, it's very simple. We simply cannot solve large, intractable development challenges thinking that it's going to be the singular success of an institution, of a particular discipline or a particular denomination or one particular church. We will have to come together, and as the call has long gone out, come, let us reason together. When we find ourselves in times of crises, it is not the time to seek self-promotion and seek brand appreciation for our isolated brands, but it is time to mount a monumental campaign of solidarity for those whom the city may not have heard and may not have prepared for. So universities like the University of Pretoria and University of South Africa, we are coming together in shared interest, with a shared will, with shared resources, insights, and networks, so that we can also share the development gains, and we can share the development benefits with our participating communities in civil society. So for us, it made perfect sense to join this effort and to not see it as individual, but to see it as a monumental time, needing monumental collaboration and needing monumental results. Thank you, Lance.
Thank you very much, Dr. James. Reverend Mashowane, being the person, I suppose, just a little bit outside of this group, you are a long partner with the Center for Faith and Community, but your perspective is different, I suppose, with UNISA, Prof. Hichu and Stefan. Much of our work was focused primarily on precarious communities in the city, on the streets, but your own work is primarily based in hospitals. So with your long history of working in health, in a faith-based NGO, how is the plight of these underserved communities been placed at the center of your work at Hospivision?
Thank you, Mr. Thomas, and greetings to you all. Let me first start by saying that the work that Hospivision does is to provide pastoral spiritual care to patients in hospitals, not only patients, but also the healthcare workers, as well as the family members. And we have been doing this work for 22 years in public hospitals in Gauteng, and we are also recently, for the past 6 years, in the Western Cape. Now, came hard lockdown, obviously came with all sorts of restrictions, even in the hospital environment. First of all, we use volunteers to do the work that we do. We've got a staff of about 31 staff members that do the work that we are called to do in the hospitals. And we've had before COVID about 150 to 300 volunteers who all of a sudden were not now allowed in hospitals. Secondly, the restrictions were that the patients were not allowed to be visited by their loved ones. And that's where Hospivision came in. We now had to represent the families and give that support and be there for the patients, seeing that their loved ones could not be there. But most importantly, we realized that the healthcare workers themselves needed attention. And they were actually demanding our services because they have not seen people die at the rate that people were dying or are dying during this time during their career. And they had their own anxieties, or rather they still have their own anxieties. They had their own fears, and we had to be there to support them, to motivate them, to encourage them, to debrief them, to hear them out, to give them a shoulder to cry. During our time, we have not ministered to as many healthcare workers as we have during this time of COVID. So COVID has really exposed what is essential, and that the work of pastoral carers is essential during this time. The sad thing is that Hospivision is not in every public hospital. The sad thing is that pastors were not allowed access in the hospitals to even visit their church members or community members who were lying in hospitals. And those people were not attended to. There was not somebody at their bedside to support them. We thank God for the benefit of being permitted to be in hospitals during lockdown because of the relationship that we have built with the hospitals over time. Obviously, not only relationship has been built, but also trust has been developed. We have obviously amassed a lot of experience over the time, and we actually consider ourselves leaders in the pastoral care and counseling field in the hospital environment. So we were there and are still there and continue to be there for those who cannot be visited by their loved ones, and most importantly, also the healthcare workers. In explaining the work that we do, I mentioned that we also care for the family members. And in the Western Cape, we have started a project we call a family liaison project, where we actually phone the family members of those who are lying in hospital. Our people are used to getting calls from the hospital only when their loved ones has died. And in so doing, when we call them, we are being proactive, and we are assisting the hospitals also in the fact that the hospitals will not be inundated with calls from the public and community members asking about their loved ones. And we're giving them an opportunity to focus on the most important thing that they're in hospital for, to care for patients. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Pashilwane. So we could move on to the second part of this discussion. I suppose COVID-19 was a steep learning curve for all of us, and many of us are still learning. But I think just if we reflect on our own sectors, maybe if one or two of you would like to think of your own sector and just think of what were the successes and what were the failures that you would like to mention in this forum that maybe we can all learn from. I invite any one of you to respond.
Maybe I will go first, Mr. Thomas. I wear two caps, two hats as I am sitting here, that of Chief Executive Officer of Hospivision, and obviously a pastor myself. What we have had to do as the church, seeing that we could no longer gather together in one place in flesh, we have had to think out of the box. We've had to be creative, and immediately we were able to move our services to virtual, to virtual services. So fellowship and the liturgical space then became virtualized, and we have been able to do that seamlessly, and it has come with its benefits. For example, I, for one, have managed to preach to people who would have never came to visit our church, and therefore the opportunity that moving services online has created is that of a larger and bigger audience, and not necessarily people that are churched, not necessarily people that are in our denomination, the Full Gospel Church of God in South Africa, and not necessarily people that are within the vicinity of the church. People could or can still join our services from anywhere. The other advantage, of course, is that with on-site church service, you've got to be there at a particular time. But with online service, even if you miss the time, you can still watch it, watch the service and be part of the service at a later stage. So yes, COVID has brought some advantages. And of course, there were challenges and there are challenges. Not everybody could afford data. So some people, some church members could not or cannot join the services. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend. Stefan or Prof. Hugo or Stefan, go ahead.
I could come in. I mean, I can reflect on it a little bit. I don't think, firstly, we can speak of the church. You know, I think churches are on corners of streets, but they are also the people. They are also increasingly faith-based organizations. So I think for me, it was a mixed bag, and it remains a mixed bag. I mean, even right now, there are churches that advocate vaccination and churches that are against vaccination. So it's a mixed bag, and that's the difficult territory I think we find ourselves in. I agree with Thabiso in terms of the positives but I also think we have to be cautious about virtualization of spirituality because of the access that some don't have. Daniel Pilario is the dean of a theological school in the Philippines, and he says that moment of breaking bread together at communion is for some poor people the only real social connector that they have. And you take that away, you take almost their lifeline away from them. And I think that also happened during this time. With homelessness, we were on a very interesting journey. Churches, we kind of wouldn't have expected it from opened their doors, opened fancy sanctuaries and office buildings for homeless people during the time. The church in a gated community, mega churches, small churches, many of the inner city churches, because inner city churches by definition are kind of having to deal with these issues every day. Churches in Rayton, churches in Hartbeespoort and Brits. So that was interesting. In some cases, churches wouldn't open their doors for people to come in, but they shared very generously of their resources, money, goods, volunteers got involved. Many churches struggled. They asked questions. They wanted to get involved, but they were scared. So they asked, you know, can you give us guarantees that it will be safe? And in the end, they might not have gotten involved. And then I think there were churches that were paralyzed, you know, that waited for the president to tell them what they can do and what they can't do. And so I think it was a mixed bag. And I think that raises questions for me about also theology and schools of theology and religion and how we do that. Are we preparing our own students to think of themselves as the essential workers that Thabiso talked about, as frontline workers? I mean, we assumed the healthcare workers will be out there, and they were out there. But theologians and theological students didn't necessarily think of themselves in that way. And yet, that important thing of pastoral and spiritual care that Thabiso talked about was often absent. So how do we prepare? So I think these are raising profound questions. And in some ways, I think it was very exciting to see who came to the fore and wanted to engage. And it was also sometimes a bit depressing to feel a sense of paralysis and not knowing how to respond to the pandemic. Not just this pandemic, but the ongoing pandemics of poverty, inequality, gender-based violence, and all those kinds of issues. I think sometimes we find ourselves paralyzed. And then I think just a last thought, Lance, I think we have to also broaden it. It's not just the church. I mean, the Indian Welfare Society, the Laudium Welfare Society did amazing things. The Gift of the Givers did amazing things, and they do so every day. In a city like eThekwini, which is much more religiously diverse, it was wonderful to see how different religious groups found each other in the crisis and collaborated on the streets, doing things together. And almost in the same way as Genevieve said, we had to forget about our institutional narcissism. The doctrinal things were not at the core. It was our being joined in service of humanity that brought us together. And I think that is very important. And the pandemic and a pandemic can teach us that if we are willing to learn. And I think that's part of the challenge. I think the challenge is, are we willing to take that risk, that first step into the unknown? And my sense is many churches, many people of faith, and just all of us, that's a difficult thing. You know, we're scared of unknown territory. And I think a pandemic invites us into unknown territory to be courageous and to do things we haven't done before, in ways we haven't done before, and with people we haven't done things with before.
Thank you very much.
I could maybe just take it from there, and one of the issues that we as a family physician, we teach people how to deal with uncertainty, but we've never had the levels of uncertainty that we had in the pandemic. And I think the same happened in the church. So what was successful was the way in which we could collaborate to deal with people in real need, like the homeless people. What I think we haven't succeeded with is between, let's say, the health world and the church is, first of all, how to deal with the uncertainty issues, and how the church deal with signs and uncertainty, how the church help people to make meaning of all these issues and all the uncertainties, and how I think the church is struggling between what I will just bluntly call magic and reason, that makes it possible for people to say that God will protect me. I don't need to wear a mask. God will protect me. I don't need to vaccinate. So I want to take it from the practicalities also to the meaning making. And the church is a very strong meaning maker in society to help people to make sense of what's happening around them. And I think there we are struggling, and the same also in the health sector. Although in the health sector we are primarily there to preserve life, and it's very much focused on people, whereas actually we need to also worry about the planet. We need to also ask the question of what does the pandemic tell us about how our lifestyle and what we how we see things. So I think there are many layers of meaning making where I think we would have to give attention in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. James, would you like to add something, or
Okay.
Go ahead.
Lance, I must say I was quite confused, because here we have a crisis of global proportions in our lifetime. This is not stuff of history. It is among us. It is here with us. And we had these various categorizations of churches who showed us different ways of responding to the crisis. I don't believe we can say, as people of faith, those who read the Old and the New Testament, that we are unprepared for crisis. I think the Old and the New Testament has been warning us, and this is a tale as old as time, that there can be impending destruction and impending doom. And the Old Testament prophets were reminding the people of God throughout the Old Testament, and we see that also with the disciples in the New Testament. So we are being prepared as the people of God, as the people of faith, for a crisis. The question is, what do we choose to do in the time of crisis? Now, in Jeremiah's time in the Old Testament, we see Jeremiah's response to the impending doom very interesting. Jeremiah is actually weeping for the state of the nation, weeping for the state of the people, deeply concerned and distressed because of the impending destruction. Unlike the false prophets of the time Jeremiah writes about, who treat the wounds of the people lightly, Jeremiah is the one who understands this is a clear and unmistakable moment in his life, in his call, in the call of the people of God to prepare. I'm very interested in the text in Jeremiah 6:16, where he says, and this is what the Lord says, stand at the crossroads and look. So standing requires stop all the busyness, stop all the barren busyness, the church council meetings that they get to discuss who's getting which empire and which resources are going to be attached to it. We need to stop all the barren busyness. It's time at the crossroads to stop, reassess our busyness, reassess our activities, and look. Look at the nation, hear the reverberations of the cries for justice, hear about the distress, the fact that the poor are punished and the rich are favored in the healthcare system, the fact that 27 years into democracy, we are plunging deeper into a healthcare crisis year after year, which COVID has merely just brought to the surface. So Jeremiah says, stand and look. And in the time of crisis, many of our churches chose to hide under a rock. Ask for the tried and tested paths. Ask for what happened in the past when there were pandemics. Ask for what happened when there was impending destruction. How would we as the people of God, as the church, prepare for those seasons? What is our posturing in this time? What is required of us? This is a time where the gospel's claims are being tested. The claims of the gospel, the fact that mission and health and healing went so closely together in the church world, just caused me great distress that in the time of a global pandemic, that many churches chose to actually shut their doors and remain out of sight. And so, like Jeremiah said, find out where the good way is. Now we know the good way is justice because God is the God of justice. And if that is the good way, then walk in it. So there in that text, maybe Lance, I can just say, here is perhaps a framework for how we as the church can prepare ourselves for times of crisis and impending destruction. Thanks, Lance.
Thank you very much. I think you gave us a very strong image of the pandemic as a stop button, a pause button. And I think post-pandemic, we cannot be the same people that we are. I'm sure with our experiences that we've had during the COVID lockdown, we've understood that the world can't continue as it is. So my next question is, what vision do you have beyond the pandemic? What do you see changing to create a more just and fair society going forward from this moment?
Is that directed at me, Lance?
The thought that it's at anybody. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think just from our own learnings, we've all been immersed in quite a hectic moment in our own lifetime. The pause button has been hit. Do we unpause and continue as usual, or do you have a vision that goes beyond the pandemic? And I think maybe if people have ideas of what could change, what could be better, what could be different, maybe to just share it with everybody that's on this discussion.
Lance, can I storm in?
You're most welcome.
Where other people may not have. I mean, all indications are that post-COVID may also be a hope that may not be true, and that pandemics is definitely predicted to be part of life that's coming as things are continuing. And so what I see there, I did not address the horrific issues around corruption in health. I thought that we shouldn't discuss it here. I can just say, for me as an individual, this nearly killed my spirit, but leave that as it may. The point is, the church, and the point of that is that these institutions in life, of which the state is probably one of the most important ones, but the church as well, the task is to negotiate the resources to the world. But what happens is to negotiate the resources to be distributed amongst ourselves. So if I think of a post-COVID world, is that we will just be aware of the roles of these institutions in life. And then you get all the justice issues, etc. But I want to take it a few steps further and say, it is not only the pandemic. Global warming is more serious than the pandemic. And the purpose of tonight's discussion is the role of the church. And I want to bring it back to meaning making and say that, Lance, is it okay? I just want to say that I think the church and other institutions, as well as the collaboration between health and church and environment, needs to seriously ask, how do we build a future with our lifestyle that has developed so much around the welfare and the leisure of people? And I want to put that as a question that needs to be seriously addressed in future. Thank you, Lance.
Thank you very much for that input. Would anybody else? Yeah.
Lance, Prof. Hugo has alluded to the fact that this might not be, of course, the last pandemic, and I concur with him. I have mentioned earlier when we started that I wonder what happened in hospitals where an organization like Hospivision is not offering services such as pastoral care and counseling to the ill and the most vulnerable during this pandemic. One thing that we need to fight for as a church, and when I say fight, I don't mean riot, is to gain access to hospitals, even during time of lockdown. We are essential, and we need to be able to minister to our loved ones and our members and the community when they are ill in hospital. So what I would like to see is to see access in hospitals, not only for Hospivision. Hospivision cannot be omnipresent, but for pastors and church leaders in general, that they should have access to hospitals. I would like to commend the Western Cape government in that they are the only province that at this moment has developed a draft policy on pastoral care in hospitals, and no other province has such a policy. it's a policy. In that policy, there is some recognition of a need for pastoral care in hospitals. And I think our government needs to come to that realization that there is a need for spiritual support when people are dying, when people are ill. And what I would like to see, and I am glad that Hospivision, in partnership with the University of Pretoria through the Center for Faith and Community, is about to embark on research in spirituality in healthcare. We need to make a point out there to say there is a correlation between spirituality and health, and there is, in fact, a positive impact that spirituality plays in healthcare. And perhaps when we can prove that, when this research can be done, it will prove even to our government that need. COVID has exposed that need, but it needs to be appreciated even more, to the extent that there is access given to pastors to minister in hospitals even during hard lockdown. Thank you.
Thank you. Genevieve, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
I would say that in addition to the pastoral counseling, the prayer, the spiritual support, the death and dying support to the family, I think a very, very critical role of the body of Christ, the churches across the land, is us mounting an advocacy, mounting our voices together to really ask the critical questions. Why is this a healthcare system that favors the rich and punishes the poor? Is this consistent with the values we have in our faith? We have churches across the land. Those churches are amidst communities that see that the go-go's of our country leaving home at 4 a.m. to spiral along long lines around the clinics of our land. They go to the clinics to find out that their medication is not supplied due to tender corruption. Whenever you drive in South African communities, you inadvertently end up driving into a funeral procession because death and dying is the order of the day. And this I'm talking about even before COVID. Our grandmothers and grandfathers are burying our young. So why is it that we are silent on this gross injustice? As the people of faith, we seek to observe and to set our resources and our faith in the direction of the brokenness of the world. So my lingering question is, over and above the prayer and support and counsel to the sick and their families, it would be a plea that we join together across higher education, across the churches, across the country and the continent, to ask critical questions about this healthcare system, as well as why is it that this healthcare system and its purse that is associated was just opened for widespread and malicious damage and use during a time of a critical crisis. So I think as people of God, we ask these critical questions about our world because we seek the very essence of justice, which is long life and longevity to be shared by all, not just some of us. So that would be another area of advocacy for me, Lance.
Thank you very much. I think the first, this pandemic caught us all a little bit off guard. And I think for moments like this is always learning moments. Currently, we're busy building the bus as we're going along. But what has this experience taught us about planning for the future? Because both Tabiso and Yanni mentioned that this is most likely not our last pandemic. So what have we learned that could actually be put in place for future events of this kind? Do you have any thoughts on that from anybody in the group?
Lance, can I throw a few random thoughts? Is it okay? Yeah. I think the one thing that some of us told each other is that there were certain lessons learned and certain gains that we made that we don't want to lose. And so I think some of it means that we should institutionalize that which worked well. And we have started to do some of that. So for example, we created a thing called the Pathways Operational Center between ourselves and the NGO community and the Yanni's unit at Health Sciences. To continue that which we saw worked so well, almost that centralized support with evidence-based research on a daily basis to support those in the trenches to do their work better and to make them stronger. So I think that is one of the very important things, and we should do it across the board. But I think there are certain questions, and if I may, I would not only want to ask the critical questions of the church, because right now I am not in a church base, but I'm at a university. I think we have to ask very critical questions to ourselves as universities. What kind of a university do we want to be? What does it mean to be a public university? What is the vocation of a university in a context like South Africa with its inequality, poverty, and corruption? What does it mean? Can it be business like usual? Is it not an offense for campuses to stand empty with so many resources right in the middle sometimes of some of the largest informal settlements in our country? I think we need to ask much more critical questions about some of these things. Our commitment to things like social transformation or society transformation or overcoming gender-based violence or addressing the sustainable development goals and so forth can not only be theoretical or philosophical or tick boxes. It should be shown in the kind of partnerships we create with communities. It should be shown in how we collectively address some of the things Genevieve raised and Tabiso raised. I think universities need to play a leading role as well and a supportive role for those activists that are in the trenches and that want to bring about change in some of these areas. So I think what we learned, the last note, what we learned around homelessness, I think is something that we should say, how does that translate to all kinds of vulnerabilities and vulnerable populations in our city? How do we build a really inclusive city? So can we continue to collaborate between different disciplines, between different universities, different churches, different religious groups, with NGOs, with activists, and with politicians and officials of good faith and goodwill? How do we foster those collaboratives that are value-based to build an inclusive city and to actually address some of the deep fractures of society? And I think the ingredients are there, but it's up to people like us in our different spaces to do what we can in our spaces and then to get beyond our walls of our spaces and to connect with each other. I think we should do that. We should take those steps. But there are deep questions we should ask of ourselves as universities, as communities of faith. Yeah.
Thanks. I think you've raised quite a few. Go ahead, Prof. Yanni.
Yeah, let me jump, then the others can have more time. I think what we've learned is collaborating and focusing on people at home and how we can help people to have more agency, that they can be cared for at home and that they can prepare themselves for pandemics. And the collaboration between the church and the state and the university and other institutions, the closer you get into the streets and to the homes, the more you can collaborate, and that's possible. And I think we should definitely work hard on that so that we prepare people through our institutions to deal with these issues and the pandemics in their homes, in their communities, and there the church and the university are playing important roles. Thank you, Lance.
Thank you very much.
Let me also take a bite. Prof. Stefan de Beer mentioned earlier that you have churches who are for example, vaccination, and you have churches that are against vaccination. And I think most of those that are for vaccination, it is because the church leader believes and subscribes to vaccination and believes that vaccination is a solution. And those that do not, it's because of the influence that the leader has on the congregation. Now, I would like us to be alive to the fact that church leaders are key role players, and they've got to be acknowledged for that role, even by the health department. Church leaders are trusted, they are respected, they are looked up to by their congregants and by their community, by their communities. And therefore, if there is to be another pandemic, which we have concurred, all of us, that there will be, the first people, or one of the first people and key people to train about or to teach or to educate about the symptoms, about vaccination, is the church leaders. Because those who are anti-vaccination, to a large extent, it is because of their lack of knowledge and understanding what this vaccination means. So church leaders could have played a big role in debunking and dealing with the vaccine hesitancy that we are experiencing right now. But the health department was there and the church was there. I hear my colleagues here speak about collaboration and unity that they have seen. We appreciate that. But I would like to say that we can collaborate more, we can unite more. In the context and the perspective of the work that we do at Hospivision, I would like to see more, not pastors, not only pastors, but even lay people, lay church members trained in caring for the sick, trained in pastoral care and counseling. A lot of our training as pastors, we are taught how to preach, but little of that training, and not much of that training, is towards pastoral care and counseling. And there is a big gap there of training. And I would like to reiterate again, as I did what I mentioned earlier about research. The research on spirituality and health is urgent, and it is much needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We only have 3 minutes left, so maybe just a quick final thought on what could the university or private sector do in responding to, well, in assisting, I suppose, our responses. What was lacking in that way? What could the university do? We spoke about research, we offer services, but from the private sector, any thoughts, any last minute thoughts?
In 1 second, I will just say, as the Bible says, money answereth all things. The private sector and business could give more to NGOs. Our challenge, Hospivision can be, it's our desire, our vision, to be in every hospital, in every province, but we cannot do that because of a shortage of funds. And that is as a result of a lack of appreciation for the work that we do. So more money that the business and private sector can give to the faith-based organization to do the work that we do. Thank you.
I can just mention, Lance, that we are working with the private sector, with mining companies, and churches in communities to address all these issues. So definitely the private sector is an important partner, and not just funding, they partner also with their services, and there are examples that we're working on. Thank you.
Lance, from my side, the universities can move away from kind of closed, rigid, knowledge hoarding silos to more collaborative, freely sharing ecosystems where we break down the walls between higher education and our nation. We actively engage with government, business, civil society, and communities across settlement types. We open up our curriculation efforts and our research efforts to be more collaborative. And in that way, if we are writing about the healthcare system, we are doing so in an engaged manner and not just merely quoting each other within higher education, but we are truly engaged across all sectors to really have a deeper, rich perspective on some of these challenges. Thanks, Lance.
Thank you. So, I'd just like to thank everybody in the last few seconds of today's panel. To the panelists especially for sharing your wealth and your experience and for your commitment to transformation in South Africa. We would like to thank you for the time that you've offered up in your very busy schedules to be part of this and to share your experiences with all of us. For the people online, we'd like to thank you for also offering up your time and to listen to this important discussion. And we'd like to remind you of the next LeadUP Alumni Virtual Chat, which is scheduled for the 3rd of November. And just a final reminder that today's event is brought to you by the University of Pretoria's Alumni Relations team. I thank you. Have a good evening and a blessed evening to all of you. Thank you.